We got a call about squatters in this neighborhood, pal. You got ID?
Look, I own this house. You need to step off my porch.
Don't give me that attitude, boy. You look real nervous right now.
I'm telling you once, walk away while you still can.
That's a threat? Turn around, you're going in cuffs.
Big mistake. Federal agent, get on the ground!
The heavy pounding on the door didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like a breach attempt. The wood of the frame shuddered against the deadbolt, the vibrations traveling through the floorboards of the quiet Baldwin Hills entryway and into the soles of Morris Lewis's feet. It was just past 7 in the evening, the sky outside a bruised purple as the sun dipped below the Los Angeles horizon, and the sudden violence of the noise shattered the calm of the dinner preparation. Maurice, who had been chopping bell peppers in the kitchen, froze the knife hovering an inch above the cutting board. He didn't drop it. He didn't panic. He set it down with a deliberate, practiced silence and wiped his hands on a dish towel. In the living room, his wife Nia had already muted the television, her eyes locking onto his with a familiar sharp alertness. They didn't need to speak. The rhythm of the banging, 3 rapid heavy strikes a pause, then 3 more was designed to induce terror. It was the rhythm of authority demanding submission. "Open the damn door!" a voice roared from the other side, muffled but distinct enough to carry a jagged edge of aggression. "We know you're in there. Open it now, or we force entry." Maurice moved to the hallway, his socks sliding silently on the hardwood. He signaled for his brother Andre, who was sitting at the dining table reviewing a case file, to stay seated but alert. Andre nodded, closing the folder and sliding it under a placemat, his posture shifting from relaxed to coiled. Maurice approached the door, but stayed to the side of the frame, a tactical habit ingrained over 15 years of service. He reached for the panel on the wall that controlled the security feed. The screen flickered to life, revealing a distorted fisheye view of the front porch. Standing on his welcome mat were 3 men. They were dressed in dark tactical-style clothing, heavy vests with multiple pockets, utility belts laden with gear, and dark boots. The man in the front, the one who had been hammering on the wood, wore a black baseball cap pulled low, and a vest that had the word "Agent" stenciled in yellow across the chest, but the font was wrong. It was too bold, too generic. There were no agency rockers, no shoulder patches identifying a specific department, and no visible badge on a chain. Just the aggressive posture of a man used to getting his way through intimidation. What the man on the porch didn't know was that the camera he was currently ignoring was recording to a cloud server with a redundant backup capturing every pixel of his unauthorized presence. "State your business," Maurice called out through the closed door, his voice calm, projecting authority without screaming. He kept one hand near the deadbolt but didn't touch it. "Open the door, Mr. Lewis," the leader shouted back, leaning in close to the wood. "We have a warrant for a fugitive harbored at this address. You are interfering with an active investigation. Open it now or you go in cuffs for obstruction." It was a specific accusation designed to make a civilian panic. It carried the weight of legal doom, fugitive obstruction cuffs. But to Morris's ear, the cadence was off. Real warrant service didn't start with a screaming match unless there was an immediate threat to life, and even then the announcement would be police or federal agents, not just a demand. And they wouldn't use his name so casually while threatening to kick down a door. They would have breached already if they had a no-knock. "I need to see identification," Maurice said, his voice remaining level. "Hold your badge up to the camera. I'm not opening the door until I verify who you are." "I don't play games with criminals," the man yelled, kicking the bottom of the door. The thud was sickening, a dull crack that suggested the wood might splinter if he did it again. "I am the authority here. You open this door, or I take it off the hinges and drag you out." What Owen Graves, the man on the porch, didn't know was that his threat had just crossed a legal threshold from annoyance to felony menace. He also didn't know that the criminal he was shouting at was a senior special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and that the woman currently moving silently to the back door, Nia, was a supervisory agent with the DEA, and the brother at the table, FBI intelligence. Graves had picked the single worst house in Los Angeles to play pretend cop, and by the end of the hour, the very authority he claimed to wield would be the weight that crushed him. Nia caught Morris's eye from the kitchen and held up her phone. She hadn't called 911. She had called the watch commander at the local LAPD precinct, a direct line she had from a joint task force operation 2 years prior. She tapped the screen, indicating the line was open. "Dispatch is rolling units," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They have no record of a raid at this address. No warrant in the system." Maurice nodded. He turned back to the door. "You are not authorized to enter," he said louder this time. "I have verified with local law enforcement. There is no warrant for this address. You are trespassing. Leave the property immediately." Graves laughed, a harsh barking sound. Local PD doesn't know what we're doing. We're above them. This is federal business, pal. You think you can hide behind a phone call? We define who belongs in this neighborhood, not you. Now open up that line. We define who belongs in this neighborhood hung in the air, heavy with a subtext that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with the color of the skin of the family living inside. It was a viral quote waiting to happen, a perfect encapsulation of the entitlement driving the men on the porch. It was the kind of sentence that would be played back in a courtroom, then on the evening news, stripping away any defense of good faith mistake Graves might try to conjure later. Maurice checked the feed again. Graves had stepped back and was unholstering something. It wasn't a firearm, not yet. It was a collapsible baton. He flicked his wrist, and the metal shaft extended with a sharp snick. The other two men behind him, younger and looking more nervous, had their hands on holsters that looked suspiciously like pepper spray canisters. They were gearing up for a physical extraction. He's armed, Maurice said to Nia. Baton deployed. Prepare for breach. Andre, Nia said softly. Andre was already moving. He didn't pull a weapon. Instead, he moved to the side window, peering through the slats of the blinds to get a visual on the street. Silver sedan. Andre reported, his voice cool and detached. No government plates. Looks like a personal vehicle. Light bar on the dash, not the roof. Decal on the side says Wolfhound Recovery Services. They're bounty hunters, Maurice. Or private security. Fake cops, Maurice muttered. The adrenaline spiked, but he wrestled it down. If they were private citizens acting as law enforcement, the rules of engagement were different, but the danger was higher. They were untrained, unaccountable, and likely desperate for a payday. Sir, Maurice said, pitching his voice to carry through the door and to the neighbors who he knew would be starting to watch. I am informing you that I am armed. I am ordering you to retreat. You are attempting a home invasion. Invasion, Graves screamed. I'm executing a lawful order. You're the one escalating this. Don't you threaten me with a weapon, boy. I'll have you buried under the jail. The slur was almost there, dancing on the edge of the word boy. Maurice felt the heat rise in his neck, the ancient ancestral anger of a man being disrespected in his own sanctuary. He had spent 10 years building this life. He was the one who organized the block parties. He was the one who helped Mrs. Gable down the street with her groceries every Thursday. He had built a garden in the back where the neighborhood kids learned to plant tomatoes. He was a pillar here. And this man, this stranger with a mail-order vest, was trying to strip that dignity away with a baton and a loud voice. Suddenly, the dynamic outside shifted. A micro-turn. The neighbor from across the street. Mr. Henderson, an elderly man who had lived on the block for 40 years, stepped out onto his porch. He was wearing his robe and slippers, squinting through thick glasses. Hey, Henderson shouted, his voice thin but brave. What's going on over there, Maurice? You okay? Graves spun around, pointing the baton at Henderson. Get back inside, old man. This is a police operation. Interfere and you go to jail too. Police? Henderson stammered, looking at the unmarked car and the men in t-shirts. You don't look like police. Where's your unit? I said back inside. Graves took 2 steps toward the street, effectively abandoning his position at the door to intimidate a witness. This was the mistake Maurice had been waiting for. It created a gap. Maurice unlocked the deadbolt. He didn't throw the door open. He cracked it, leaving the heavy security chain engaged. He needed to be seen. He needed the camera to catch his face, calm and compliant, contrasted against the rage of the man on his lawn. Mr. Henderson, go inside, Maurice called out. Call 911. Tell them there are armed men attempting entry. Graves whipped back around, seeing the door crack open. He charged. He's opening, get him. He hit the door with his shoulder. The chain pulled taut, snapping tight with a violent clang, but it held. The door shuddered, hitting Maurice in the shoulder, but he braced himself, his boots gripping the floor. He didn't strike back. He didn't reach through the gap. He simply held the line. That is assault, Maurice said, his face inches from the gap. You have just committed assault on a homeowner. Graves was panting now, his face red and sweaty. He jammed his face into the crack of the door. I'm taking you down. You hear me? I'm dragging you out of here, and we're going to see how tough you are in the back of the car. Show me the warrant, Maurice demanded again. Show me the badge. I don't need to show you anything, Graves spat. I have probable cause you fit the description, black male, mid-30s, uncooperative. That's enough for me. Fit the description. The lazy catch-all. The universal excuse for lazy policing and predatory profiling. Maurice felt a cold clarity wash over him. This wasn't about a fugitive. This was about power. This was about a man who believed his uniform, even a fake one, gave him the right to terrorize. Inside, Nia was speaking rapidly into the phone. Suspect is attempting to breach. He has assaulted the homeowner. We are armed federal agents, but we are holding fire to prevent crossfire in a residential zone. We need that unit now. ETA. 2 minutes. The voice on the other end crackled. Sergeant Miller is leading the roll. He's 2 blocks out. 2 minutes, Nia relayed to Maurice. 2 minutes was a lifetime in a hallway fight. Graves backed off the door and motioned to his 2 cohorts. Go around back. Break the glass if you have to. Flush him out. This was the point of no return. Graves was ordering a break-in. He was commanding his subordinates to commit a felony burglary in plain view of the street. If you go to the back, Maurice said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious, you will be met with force. Do not go to the back of this house. Is that a threat? Graves sneered. It is a warning, Maurice said. Stay on the porch. One of the younger men hesitated. He looked at Graves, then at the side gate leading to the backyard. Owen, maybe we should wait for the cops. Shut up, Graves yelled. I'm in charge. Go! The young man started moving toward the gate. Maurice looked at Andre. Andre was already at the back door, his hand on his hip, waiting. The back of the house was where the kids' playroom was. It was empty now. The kids were at their grandmother's for the weekend, thank God. But the violation was absolute. Just as the subordinate reached for the gate latch, the night was split by the chirping of a siren. Not the wail of a distant cruiser, but the sharp, aggressive whoop-whoop of a unit arriving on scene. Blue and red lights flooded the street, bouncing off the white siding of the house and washing out the color of the grass. An LAPD cruiser screeched to a halt at a crooked angle, blocking the silver sedan. Then a second cruiser. Then a third. The cavalry had arrived. But this was the most dangerous moment. Police responding to a man with a gun call or a home invasion often had imperfect information. They would see men in vests and a black man in a doorway. The potential for a friendly fire tragedy was sky high. Maurice knew this. He immediately closed the door and locked it. He didn't want to be the silhouette in the doorway when the officers drew their weapons. Hands, let me see your hands, a voice boomed from the street. It was amplified, coming from the PA of the lead cruiser. Maurice watched the monitor. Graves didn't drop his baton. Instead, he turned toward the police with an arrogant swagger. He raised his left hand, but kept the baton in his right, pointing it at the house. I'm Agent Graves, he shouted. I've got a non-compliant suspect inside. We're securing the perimeter. He was trying to big league the LAPD. He was trying to frame the narrative before they even stepped out of the car. The lead officer, a thick-set sergeant with graying hair, stepped out behind the cover of his door. He had his weapon drawn, but pointed low at the ground. Drop the weapon, the sergeant yelled. Drop the baton now. I'm on the job, Graves yelled back, sounding exasperated like he was talking to a subordinate. Wolfhound recovery. We're serving a warrant. Help my guys cover the back. I said drop it. The sergeant's voice didn't waver. And get your men out from the side of the house now. The 2 younger men by the gate froze. They looked at the real police officers with their crisp uniforms and standardized weapons, and then at Graves in his mismatched gear. The reality of the situation pierced their tough guy cosplay. They slowly raised their hands and walked backward away from the gate toward the street. Graves looked furious. He threw the baton onto the grass with a dramatic gesture of disgust. Fine. You want to let a fugitive run, that's on you. I'm filing a report with your watch commander. Walk backwards toward me, the sergeant commanded. Interlace your fingers behind your head. Inside the house, Maurice let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for 20 minutes. Okay, he said. Time to go out. Vest up, Andre asked. No, Maurice said. No vests, just badges. We go out as homeowners. Hands visible, slow movements. He unlocked the door again. The sound of the deadbolt clicking was loud in the sudden silence of the street. He opened the door slowly. Officer, Maurice called out. Homeowner coming out, hands empty. The spotlight from the cruiser swung from Graves to Maurice. Maurice blinked against the glare but didn't flinch. He walked slowly onto his porch, his hands raised to shoulder height. In his right hand, held delicately between his thumb and forefinger, was a leather wallet with a gold badge embedded in it. Stay right there, sir, another officer shouted from behind a car door. I'm staying, Maurice said. My name is Maurice Lewis. I am the owner of this property. The man you have detained attempted to force entry. Graves, who was now being handcuffed by a rookie officer near the hood of the cruiser, twisted his head around. He's lying. He's got a fugitive in there. Check the house. The sergeant walked up the driveway, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He approached the porch cautiously. He looked at Graves, then at Maurice. He saw the calmness in Maurice's stance. He saw the specific way Maurice held his hands, not in surrender, but in a ready position used by law enforcement during de-escalation. "Sir, do you have ID?" the sergeant asked. "I do," Maurice said. "It's in my hand. I'm going to lower my hand slowly to show you. Is that clear?" "Go ahead," the sergeant said. Maurice lowered the wallet and flipped it open. The gold shield of the BATFE caught the beam of the flashlight. The sergeant leaned in, squinting. He saw the eagle, the agency lettering, and the photo ID of Maurice Lewis, Senior Special Agent. The sergeant's posture changed instantly. The tension drained from his shoulders. He holstered his weapon. "Agent Lewis?" The sergeant said, a mix of relief and confusion in his voice. "I apologize. Dispatch said homeowner didn't mention the agency." "Dispatch didn't know," Maurice said, lowering his hands. "My wife is inside. DEA. My brother is FBI. We were having dinner." The sergeant looked back at Graves, who was currently being shoved into the back of the cruiser, still shouting about his rights. He tried to raid a house full of feds." The sergeant asked, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "He tried to raid a black family's house," Maurice corrected gently but firmly. "The fact that we're feds is just the reason he's going to prison for a long time. If we weren't, he might have hurt someone." The sergeant nodded, his expression hardening. "We'll get him processed. Trespassing assault impersonation. Attempted burglary," Maurice added. He ordered his men to break the back window. I have it on audio. "And deprivation of rights under color of law," Nia said, stepping out onto the porch. She had her badge clipped to her belt now. "Even if he's private security, he was acting as an agent of the state in his own mind. We're going to need a full report." "You'll get it," the sergeant promised. But the night wasn't over. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the shakes, the physical toll of near violence. Maurice looked at the street. The neighbors were all out now. They stood in clusters, phones out recording. They had seen the police arrive. They had seen Maurice come out with his hands up. One of the neighbors, a young woman who had recently moved in, was talking loudly. "I saw them take him out. I knew something was going on in that house. You can never trust people even in a nice neighborhood." She was talking about Maurice. Even with Graves in cuffs, the stain remained. The visual of the police cars, the spotlight on the porch, it confirmed a bias for some people. That was the friction. The victory wasn't clean. It was messy. "Officer," Maurice said, "I need a favor. I need you to clarify something loudly." The sergeant looked at the neighbors, then at Maurice. He understood. "Listen up." The sergeant turned and shouted to the street, his voice booming. "Folks, there is no problem at this residence. The individual in the back of my car was attempting a scam. Mr. Lewis is the victim here. He is a federal agent and a respected member of this community. Go back to your homes." It helped. The young woman stopped talking. Mr. Henderson nodded from his porch, waving his cane in support. But it wasn't enough to scrub the memory. Then came the institutional backbone. About 20 minutes later, a black SUV rolled up silently behind the police cruisers. 2 men in suits got out. It was the Assistant Special Agent in charge ASAC of the Los Angeles Field Division, Maurice's boss. Nia had called him during the standoff. The ASEC, a tall man with a stern face, walked straight past the local cops, flashing his credentials without breaking stride. He walked up the driveway to where Maurice was giving a statement. "Maurice, the ASAC said, shaking his hand firmly. "You good." "I'm good, boss," Maurice said. "Family is safe." "I heard the recording," the ASAC said. "Nia sent it over. We define who belongs in this neighborhood." "That's what he said." "That's the one," Maurice said. "Well," the ASAC said, turning to look at the cruiser where Graves was sitting, his face pressed against the glass. "He's about to find out that the federal government defines who belongs in a federal penitentiary." The ASAC walked over to the sergeant. "I want the booking numbers as soon as they are generated. We are filing federal charges for assaulting a federal officer. We're taking jurisdiction on the impersonation charge as well. This guy isn't just getting a fine. We're tearing his little operation apart." This was the freeze moment. The sergeant looked at the ASAC, then at Graves. The gravity of the situation settled. This wasn't a he said she said dispute anymore. This was the weight of the United States Department of Justice coming down on a strip mall cowboy. Graves, watching through the window, saw the suits. He saw the way the police sergeant deferred to them. He saw Maurice standing on the porch, not in cuffs, but chatting with the men in charge. The color drained from his face. He stopped shouting. He sat back against the hard plastic seat, the realization finally piercing his delusion. He had picked the wrong house. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. It wasn't a viral video that did it, though the footage from the doorbell camera did eventually leak. It was the paperwork. The Wolfhound Recovery Services license was pulled by the state licensing board by noon, triggered by a priority flag from the DOJ. It turned out Graves had a history of wrong address raids that had been swept under the rug because the victims were poor, undocumented, or too scared to complain. But Maurice Lewis wasn't scared. He spent the next 3 days giving depositions. He sat in a conference room with Nia and Andre detailing every second of the encounter. He submitted the video files. He submitted the audio of the threat. The payoff wasn't a settlement check. It was a systematic dismantling of Graves's life. Graves was charged with 3 counts of assault, attempted burglary, and impersonating a peace officer. But the kicker was the federal enhancement. Because he had targeted federal agents even unknowingly, the sentencing guidelines shifted. 6 months later, Maurice stood in a courtroom. He wasn't in the dock. He was on the witness stand. Graves was at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit that was very real, stripped of his tactical vest and his fake authority. The prosecutor played the video. The courtroom listened to the banging. They listened to the threat. "We define who belongs in this neighborhood," the voice on the recording sneered. The prosecutor paused the video. "Agent Lewis," she asked, "when the defendant said this, did you feel that your safety was compromised?" "I felt that he intended to harm my family to prove a point about his power," Maurice said clearly. "He believed that his uniform gave him the right to bypass the Constitution." The prosecutor turned to Graves. "And what do you think defines who belongs in a neighborhood, Mr. Graves? Is it the law or is it your baton?" Graves stared at the table. He didn't answer. The boomerang had landed. The words he used to assert dominance were now the bars of his cage. The judge sentenced Graves to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was permanently barred from holding any security license or owning a firearm. His Wolfhound company was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to previous victims that the investigation had uncovered. Maurice walked out of the courthouse into the bright Los Angeles sun. Nia was waiting for him. They walked to their car holding hands. They drove back to Baldwin Hills. They pulled into the driveway of the house on Oakwood Terrace. The garden in the back was blooming. The kids were home now playing in the yard. Mr. Henderson waved from across the street. "Hey, Maurice, garden's looking good." "Thanks, Mr. Henderson," Maurice called back. He unlocked his front door, the same door that had shuddered under the blows of a fake cop, and stepped inside. The house was quiet, peaceful. It was his sanctuary again, not because he had a badge, but because he had refused to let anyone take his dignity. He walked to the kitchen, picked up the cutting board, and started chopping vegetables for dinner. This story highlights a terrifying reality, the gray zone of private policing, and the dangers of profiling that can occur even in one's own home. While the protagonists here were protected by their professional status, the initial aggression they faced is a common experience for many who do not have a badge to shield them. The police impersonator, or overzealous bounty hunter, relies on the victim's fear and lack of knowledge to gain compliance. The victory here wasn't just about being federal agents, it was about knowing their rights, remaining calm under extreme pressure, and documenting the interaction. First, always verify the identity of anyone claiming to be law enforcement at your door. You have the right to keep the door closed unless they have a warrant they can show you through a window or peephole, and to call 911 to verify their presence. Next, if you are unsure, request a supervisor immediately and clearly state that you are doing so. Legitimate officers will generally facilitate this to de-escalate. Third, utilize technology like doorbell cameras or cell phones to create an objective record of the encounter, as this evidence is often the only defense against a false narrative. Finally, never consent to a search or entry if you are unsure of the legal basis. Clearly state, "I do not consent," so it is on the record. Some elements are selectively fictionalized for education.